Do you know that moment when everything looks in slow motion? When do the eyes cross and the whole world disappear around? That's how it started. I'm Elena, and that night, I had no idea that my life was going to turn upside down, the seaside. Party was on fire, with laughter, music, and one mood that only asked for one thing: naughtiness. I was there, spinning a glass of wine in my hand, trying to look unpretentious, but deep down, I felt that something was about to happen. And then, I felt that look. Intense, deep, and yes, totally dangerous. Charles was leaning against the bar, with a malicious smile on his lips, as if he already knew exactly what he would do to me. He did not license to enter my world. He simply invaded without warning, without mercy. "Do you have a sense of what it causes when you look at me like this?" he said, in such a low voice that it almost looked like a whisper, but loaded with an intention that made my body tremble. The chill was instantaneous. I should have retreated, but instead, I let out a provocative smile. "What if I have?" He approached, closing the distance between us. The warmth of his body against mine, the smell of sea, alcohol, and desire to mix in the air. It was impossible to ignore the tension that grew between us. "So you already know what will happen." My heart accelerated. I was completely mesmerized by that look. Her fingers brushed my waist, light, but full of intent. It was not a common flirting. It was a game. And me? I was more than ready to play. There, under the silver moon and the sound of the waves in the background, our destination was sealed. From that night, Charles became my addiction. Each meeting was an explosion of desire, as if our bodies spoke, a language that only we understood. Time seemed to fly when we were together, and every touch, every look was like a promise too much. He was not just intense, he was dominant. When I pulled me close, the whole world disappeared. His perfume was on my skin, his presence burned as fire. And me? I couldn't resist. The days passed, and what began as an overwhelming connection became a necessity. I wanted to be close to him all the time, wanted to be the center of his world. And for a while, I went. But Charles was a man who didn't like to share. He always knew where I was, with whom, what I did. In the beginning, it excited me. I felt desired, protected, unique. But gradually, I began to realize that that intensity could be a warning. One night, after a candle-lit dinner, he held my chin, forcing me to look straight into his eyes. His voice was firm, low, loaded with possession. "Do you understand what it means to be by my side?" I answered without hesitation. I wanted that man, with everything he brought. He thought he could tame it, that our love would be greater than any obstacle. But I didn't know I was playing with fire. Charles involved me like a gale. He wanted to have me all over, with no room for doubts or distractions. At first, I thought it was exciting, but over time began to suffocate. The jealousy became a shadow between us. He wanted to know every detail of my routine, who was my co-workers, what messages I received on my cell phone. I always wondered that I was slow to answer, with that enigmatic look, as if I already knew the answer before even asking. I was trying to take everything in the joke. He said he exaggerated, that none of this was necessary. He laughed, but never let the subject die. Only, inside, I felt that every day he tested me more. I started to notice a pattern. When something bothered him, he closed, punished me with the silence, and it killed me inside. So, to avoid conflict, I started omitting little things, not because I had something to hide, but because I knew any trivial detail could become a storm. It was then that I found myself lying about silly things. A coffee after work, an ignored message, a call I preferred not to answer in front of it. Small secrets that together have become an abyss between us. But secrets, however small, have weight, and when they begin to accumulate, they leave cracking. I felt that that intense passion was turning into something dangerous. Sooner or later, everything would collapse. The tension between me and Charles was different. The desire still burned, but with him came doubts, glances loaded with distrust, unanswered questions. His possession, which once made me feel desired, began to become suffocating. At work, a new game started without me noticing. Daniel, my teammate, was pure provocation. He always arranged an excuse to approach, to brush his fingers on my shoulders, to throw me those looks that made my body warm. Unlike Charles, he didn't try to arrest me. It just made me laugh. I made me forget the weight I carried indoors. That night, after a company event, we stayed later at the hotel bar. The drink burned in the throat, and the desire, repressed for so long, began to boil. My body longed for a different touch, for something forbidden. He approached hot, confident. Whiskey's breath found my neck, and my breath failed. My lips have gone through, ready for a kiss that I should have avoided. But when his fingers pressed my waist, I felt a shiver that made me give in. It was an intense night of wrinkled sheets and red, hot skin. But as much as pleasure has dominated my body, the weight of betrayal fell on me even before the sun rises. Now I had a secret too big to hide. I wanted to believe that secret could be buried, but guilt didn't leave me alone. My lips still felt the remnants of what happened that night. My body still carried the echoes of forbidden pleasure. But Charles felt. He always knew how to read every detail, every slightest change in my gaze. In the following days, their touches became more intense, their most demanding kisses. He was pulling me close to no reason. His fingers squeezed my waist harder. It was not affection, it was a test. The way he looked at me changed. The eyes, once full of possession and desire, now carried something darker. I knew he suspected, and I felt when he took me differently, more gross, as if I wanted to remind me of who I belonged to. In bed, sex has gained a different tone. He dominated me without hesitation, as if he wanted to erase any trace that another man could have left. Each kiss was a challenge. Each onslaught carried a silent question. His silence was worse than any scream. When I hugged me at night, her fingers slid down my back in a too slow way, as if they sought marks that were not his. Charles never asked directly, but I knew he was waiting for the right time for the final blow, just a spark, and everything would explode. I tried to hide. I tried to act as if nothing had happened, but Charles was too smart to be deceived. One night, as I got out of the bath, he was sitting on the edge of the bed, his cell phone in his hand. The cold look. My stomach sank. I knew that moment would arrive. Who is Daniel? My blood froze. My body was rigid. I could lie. I could say it was any coworker, but his tone didn't give me this option. He already knew. I just wanted to hear from my mouth. The silence took over the room. I felt his breathing, felt the tension in the air. My lips opened to speak, but no word came out. I'm not an idiot, Elena. Do you think I don't realize? The way you dodge, the way you avoid me. My heart was beating out. My eyes burned. I wanted to deny. I wanted to invent anything to erase that moment, but it was too late. He got up, walked to me and held my face, squeezing my chin. Her fingers slid slowly through my skin, brushing my mouth. It tells me, was he better than me? I felt his breathing near, hot. My body crashed between fear and excitement. He turned me on his back, gluing his body on mine, the fingers sliding around my waist, squeezing, testing my reaction. The impact of those words hit me like a sharp blade. I knew that from there, everything would change. The silence between us was suffocating. Charles didn't need to scream. His gaze already said everything. He ran his fingers around my waist, squeezing lightly, feeling my skin shivering under the firm touch. His breathing was hot against my neck. Do you think you can fool me? My breath failed. The tension between us had a bitter and sweet taste at the same time. I expected fury, hoped for him to leave me, but he didn't do any of that. Instead, he pulled me hard, gluing my body to his. His smell surrounded me. His lips brushed my skin. Each touch burned like fire. It was anger. It was possession. But above all, it was desire. I should resist. I should get away. But when his fingers went down my skin, I understood. He didn't just want answers. He wanted to remind me of who I belonged to. His touch was demanding. His kiss had a taste of dominion. My lips opened by instinct. My skin begged for more. He turned me on his back, holding my hip hard, making a point of pressing his body against mine. Do you want to play with me, Elena? The voice was a whisper loaded with danger and excitement. My body trembled, divided between fear and desire. He ran his lips over my shoulder, his teeth lightly marking my skin. With each touch, he reminded me that he was still his. The provocation consumed us. Each movement was a challenge, a dangerous game where no one would be unharmed. That night, there was no love. There was a game of revenge and desire, where we both knew there would be no winners, just the tracks of what we were. The days followed were a silent battlefield. Charles didn't look at me the same way. I felt the tension with each touch, in every kiss, as if he was deciding what to do with me, but the desire between us never disappeared. He tested me, teased me. I was pulling me close just to let go shortly thereafter, leaving my body longing for what was not coming, until, one night, he decided to end the game. I was lying down, trying to pretend to sleep when I felt his body slide over mine, your hot breath against my skin. My fingers outlines a slow and torturous path through the side of my body. Do you really want me to forgive you? The question came loaded with something else. He didn't want to apologize. He wanted control. His touch was possessive, firm. His hands exploited every curve of mine with property. My body responded before my mind. I wanted him as much as he wanted to punish me. He held my wrists above my head, immobilizing me under his domain. His lips touched my skin. Each bite marked his authority. He was claiming me. My sighs mingled with his panting breath. With each touch, he demanded that I feel, that I remember who it was. His body moved against mine accurately, making me lose any control. That night, we surrendered to the fire that never stopped burning. There were no words, just skin against skin, gross desire and necessity. I knew I wasn't forgiven yet, but at that moment, it didn't matter. The next morning, the silence between us spoke more than any word. The room still carried the smell of the night before, the memory of what we had done impregnated in every corner. I watched Charles dress without looking at me, his indecipherable expression. For a moment, I thought that maybe that had been the end. Maybe he had discharged me everything he felt, and now would leave me. But then he stopped at the door, turned his face, and analyzed me. It's not over yet. Those words hit me like a shock. They were not of love, but they were not of hatred either. They were a promise. In the days they followed, everything between us changed. He didn't talk about what happened, but I felt that something inside him fought against himself. I touched me as if he was testing his own limits. Sometimes his kiss was intense, possessive, as if he wanted to erase any trace of the other man. Other times, it was slow, deep, as if trying to be convinced that he still wanted me. The nights were different. When I took me, I felt that territory was marked. He held me harder. His hands roamed my body as if they wanted to tattoo his name in me. The pleasure was carried something denser, more gross, more necessary. And me? I just wanted him to love me as before. But I knew it was impossible to go back to what it was. Love was still there, but would it resist the weight of betrayal? The days dragged on, and I felt that we were on a tight rope, balancing what was left of us. Charles didn't treat me with indifference, but it was no longer the same. There was desire, there was passion, but something inside him still fought the idea of forgiving me completely. One night as I watched him, I realized that he was tired too. Tired of wondering if I was still his. Tired of carrying the weight of distrust. I approached slowly, feeling his heavy gaze on me. I slid my fingers down his chest, feeling his breath accelerate. If you still want me, stop fighting it. He held my wrist, pulling me closer. His eyes burned. His mouth was so close to mine that I felt the warmth of his breath. Are you still mine, Elena? My heart fired. My hands slid down his body, feeling every tense muscle, every inch of desire contained. Our lips met in an intense kiss, loaded with everything we couldn't say. The clothes slowly fell, and that night we handed over to the fire that never stopped burning. I don't know if it was love or just a way to keep each other in prison. Forgiveness may not have come in words, but that night our bodies spoke for us. Does love resist? Perhaps, but desire never died.